Okay, continuing our study of the book of Genesis. We're up to chapter 33. Something I want you to think about. We don't need to decide today, but Jackie and I were talking yesterday or the day before about where we're going to go after Genesis. I think according to our outline in our Sunday school literature, I think we move back into Matthew next time. Jackie was saying, well, you want to just keep on plugging through and just go on through Exodus? I said, doesn't matter to me. I said, let's present it to the class. And so I want y'all to be thinking about where we want to go after we finish with Genesis. Do we want to plow on chronologically to Exodus, or do we want to jump back into the New Testament? Either way is okay with me. Let's just talk about it and decide. Okay, but today we're going to pick up with chapter 33 of Genesis. Remember what happened last time? We talked in great detail about the wrestling match. And I never want you to forget how significant that wrestling match is. The sons of Israel did not forget about it. I don't know if they understood the spiritual implications of it, which are manifold, but it says in chapter 32, verse 32, therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel did not eat the sinew of the hip, which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh in the sinew of the hip during that wrestling match. So, although, again, the Jews may not have understood all of the ramifications and the implications and the symbolism of it, at least they recognized it was a very significant event, and they memorialized that event by never eating the sinew of the thigh whenever they butchered and ate an animal. And so they remembered the wrestling match. And in particular, one of the things that they remembered, which we should never forget, is that as a result of the wrestling match, the way Jacob walked was changed forever. The scripture says that he limped for the rest of his life. The literal translation was that his walk was affected the rest of his life. And so the idea is that when you have an encounter with God like Jacob had, that when you get up from that encounter, be it prayer or otherwise, you should never walk the same. Your walk should be different as a result of that encounter. So it's interesting what follows that wrestling match in chapter 33. Now remember, what led up to the wrestling match was the fear that gripped Jacob as a result of what?
Of his brother.
Of his brother, that's right. Jacob has spent 20 years in outside of the promised land. He's gone to Haran. He is married. He has his wives have given birth to 11 sons at this point. He has become very wealthy. God has instructed him, all right, your time is done. Now it's time to go back to the promised land, to the land of Canaan. After 20 years, he's heading back, and he gets word that Esau has come to meet him, and that Esau has 400 of his men with him. And Jacob is stricken with fear. And I believe for good reason. I do believe that Esau had evil intentions. I think it was time in Esau's mind for payback. So we saw before, what is it that Jacob did as a result of his having been gripped with fear? He did three things. What were they?
Stole his birthright.
What's that?
Stole his birthright.
Yeah, well, that's what happened. Esau had his birthright stolen, but what did Jacob do as a result of his fear? He was fearful that Esau was going to come get it. So what did he do?
He divided his
family. He divided his property up, right? So he's hedging. And then what else did he do?
Did he put everybody in front?
Yeah, yeah. He divided them into groups. He put the least favored group up front and the most favored group back behind. And then I think he was the very last. He was behind everybody, so he was kind of chicken. So what else did he do?
Bride.
He prepared a bride. He gathered just a very nice gift that he was going to present to his brother to buy his peace. What else did he do?
He prayed.
He prayed. But he prayed. His prayer life was only 1/3 of what he did. He was relying upon his own abilities for the other two. And I think as a result of his improper dealing with his fear, that's why we have the wrestling match. Because as we said, when the man came to wrestle, it wasn't Jacob who started the fight or the wrestling match, if you will. It was God himself who came in the form of a man to start the wrestling match, because he was trying to get something away from Jacob, which was what?
His fear.
His fear. He was going to wrestle away his fear. And so Jacob has this life-altering encounter with God, and as a result of that, his name is changed from Jacob, which means the deceiver or the supplanter. Negative connotation, to Israel, means one who has strived with God and overcome. And I think that means that he overcame his fear. So then we see in chapter 33, this picks up with what happens afterward. The wrestling match occurs in the context of the heightened fear of Jacob. He's concerned about meeting his brother Esau. He thinks Esau is going to kill him and destroy all of his family and take away all of his wealth. And so he has a wrestling match, the time of prayer. He arises. His walk is changed forever. He never walks the same. And then he encounters Esau. So let's read about what happened in chapter 33. Jack, you want to start off with verse 1?
He was probably praying that, asking the Lord to help make his plan work, that he could figure it out.
Yeah. But before we read, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this reminds me of so many times when God's elect has been placed in a situation where he's going to do battle, because that's what Jacob thinks he's going to do here. And rather than God strengthening him in preparation for the battle, what does he do? He weakens him. And we've seen many examples of that in the scriptures. What does any particular come to mind?
When they were choosing, I don't remember the men and the way that they would drink water.
Yeah, that was Gideon when he was preparing to do battle with the Midianites. Gideon starts out with an army of how many people? Was it like 30,000? Yeah, and it's ultimately reduced to how many?
400.
Yeah, just a few. It may have been even less than that. But rather than Gideon's army being built up, his army is reduced. And why is that?
Because it was God's battle.
To show that the battle is the Lord's, not his. If Gideon's army would have been strengthened, he could have claimed credit. I've got a great army, they're well trained, we've got good battle instruments, but as a result of what happened, everyone knew that God is the one who is the victor. Can you think of another example? How about old David when he's going to go fight Goliath? Remember how they put the armor, the king's armor on him? You can imagine this little boy wearing this giant armor and thinking, well, this armor's not going to protect me, so what did he do? He threw off all the armor and he goes out with what?
A slingshot and
3 stones.
Slingshot and 5 smooth stones in his pocket. Didn't need all of them.
Would also when they walked around the city,
Yeah. Yeah.
the walls,
That's right. They didn't take battering rams. They didn't build siege ramps. What did they do?
Shouted.
They shouted and they blew their trumpets, and the victory was the Lord. So this is kind of the same kind of thing. This I think is a foreshadowing of all those events in the future history of Israel, when Israel is confronting a difficult time. God does not strengthen their ranks. He weakens their ranks. So why? So they will depend upon him, and he will get the glory as a result of it. So Jacob comes to meet his enemy in a weakened condition. He's literally limping at the time. The strength of his thigh has been taken away.
when was the command that was to dip, was it 7 times was it the pool of Siloam?
Mm-hmm.
They just found that thing, that's it.
Yeah. When we were there, they were excavating for it. They thought they knew where it was. And there's a little, in fact, I have a picture of it somewhere. Up here, I think I do. Yeah. Here's a part of the pool of Siloam. This is where Hezekiah's tunnel empties out. And I walked through that. I actually I went over to the Gihon Spring and I walked through that tunnel about 700 yards, scraped the top of my head, and came out right here. And this is the part that the top of the pool of Siloam. Actually, it's way larger than that. I mean, it's the pool of Siloam is a huge place. It's like the size of a couple of Olympic swimming pools. It was a major watering hole, and it's just south of the temple. Let's see. All right, so the temple is here. It's facing the Mount of Olives. The Temple Mount is over here, but on this side, this is the southern side. This is the the southern wall of the Temple Mount of Olives is over here, but this is the old city of David down here, but the Pool of Siloam is right down here in this area, and there's a lot of excavations down there. Wouldn't that be exciting to be down there digging around all that stuff? Okay. Chapter 33. Okay.
Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maidservants. He put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, Rachel and Joseph in the rear.
Pause right there. This actually had been done before. It says that this is what he did, but actually it speaks in the past tense. It should say he had divided the children among Leah and Rachel, because you see that over there in verse in chapter 32. As soon as he heard, in verse 7 it says, and Jacob was greatly afraid, and he divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels, into 2 companies. So he had already done that. So this is speaking really in the past tense. This isn't anything that he did, because at this point in time we're going to see that he had already made his preparations, and we're going to see that the only thing that he did in the context of his fear that worked was his prayer. We're going to see that his bribe didn't do anything. We're going to see that his dividing of his properties didn't do anything. So his own physical preparations, if you will, the things he concocted in his own mind, none of that stuff worked. What the only thing that worked was his prayer to God and his wrestling match with God. So read on.
He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. Who are these with you, he asked. Jacob answered, they are the children of God. They are the children God has graciously given your servant. Then the maidservants and their children approached and bowed down. Next Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau asked, what do you mean by all these droves I met? To find favor in your eyes, my lord, he said. But Esau said, I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself.
Pause right there. All right, you see what's happened thus far? We talked about this last time. One of the first things that came into Jacob's mind when he heard that Esau was coming after him, and Tommy brought this up, he says, I'll send him a bribe. All right, so he picked out a bunch of stuff that he was going to offer up as a bribe. And that was prepared and that was sent on ahead. But did it work? Didn't do anything. In fact, what does Esau say about the bribe?
I don't need it.
He says, I don't need it and I don't want it. Keep it for yourself. So we see that, again, all the preparations that Jacob made, other than prayer, went for naught. The dividing of his property, his plan to stand behind, didn't do anything. In fact, after he had his prayer time with God, rather than standing behind, he ran up to the front. Okay, and he was the first one to greet Esau. Okay, verse 10. Wanda, would you pick up from there?
No, please, said Jacob, if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably.
Pause right there. What does he mean by that?
Answered prayer.
He sees that there has been a true change in Esau. And again, not only in the context, but kind of reading between the lines, I think there truly was cause for Jacob to be fearful for his brother, because I think his brother was coming after him with the intent to do him serious harm. But he has been changed. And he has been changed how? He sees that God is working on his brother Esau. And that's why I wrote that proverb up top there. In fact, you may want to make that note in your Bible. That's Proverbs 16. When a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he causes even his enemies to be at peace with him.
Proverbs what?
Proverbs 16:7. And this is a circumstance where Jacob's preparation resulted in his coming into a right relationship with God. And because of that, and not because of his bribe, not because of his own preparations, that's how it was that his relationship with his enemy Esau was restored. Why? Because when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he causes that, as God caused even his enemies to be at peace with him. So what does that tell us? As we go through life, we make enemies. Sometimes enemies come and find us. It's not good that we should have enemies. What is the best way to overcome that?
Don't go nowhere.
What's that? Don't go anywhere? Or if that doesn't work, sometimes your enemies come and find you. Make sure that your own ways are pleasing to the Lord and leave it to God to cause your enemies to be at peace with you. All right, read on 1 in verse 11.
Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need. And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it.
Pause right there. Esau turns it down, but Jacob insists. Jacob says, I prepared this and I really want to give it to you. What do you think was motivating Jacob to insist that his brother take the gift?
I think he was trying to get him to get out of the world and into the spirit of God, move him away from the world into the divine.
Yeah, I think that's part of it.
Wait.
They
Which
should-
one? Which one? Jacob or Esau?
Jacob was trying to get Esau from worldly situation into the divine because Jacob struggled with God and now he walks differently, so he's wanting to get his brother to
I see.
share in the wonder of it.
Yeah.
I look at it another way too. If you want to give somebody, you really want to give it to them, and they turn you down, that really offends you. And he took and he accepted it, and that made Jacob feel a lot better
Yeah.
and everything. And I know that you try to give somebody something out of your heart. Now, I don't know. How do you feel about it?
Yeah. Well, and Wanda mentioned something significant too here. What was it that motivated Jacob to give the gift? Well, the first motivation was he thought Esau was going to kill him. So first off, he's trying to bribe him, he's trying to placate him. Well, then he found out that wasn't necessary. Esau wasn't out to kill him. So at that point in time, Jacob could have put the money back in his pocket, but he didn't. He offered it up to him. I think Nancy's explanation is a good one, but Wanda also said it was a matter of Jacob's own guilt. Why? Because Jacob knew that he had tricked his brother and he'd taken away a blessing. His father was going to give him a blessing. We don't know what happened to all of Isaac's property, but it was promised to Jacob rather than Esau. And so at this point in time, Jacob, I think, is trying to make amends for the grievous sin that he committed against his brother back then. Okay, so he takes it. All right, verse 13. Kenny, you want to pick up there?
Jacob said to him,
I'm sorry, verse 12.
Then Esau said, Let us be on our way, I'll accompany you. But Jacob said to him, My Lord knows that the children are tender, and I must care for the ewes and cows or nursing their young. They are driven hard, as one day all the animals will die. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, while I move along slowly at the pace of the droves before me, and that of the children, until I come to my Lord and seer. Esau said, Let me leave some of my men with you. But why do that? Asked Jacob. Just let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord. So that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth. After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan, and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. There he set up an altar and called it El Israel.
Meaning God, the God of Israel. And it's interesting, when he sets up the altar, he names that place. It's as if, and again, the name is El Elohi Israel, meaning God, the God of Israel. What's the significance of that?
It's now his God.
Yeah.
Before he had prayed to the God of his fathers, Abraham and Isaac,
Yeah.
but now belongs
Yeah.
to him.
So that's a very significant event, and Wanda brought that up last time, is that when Jacob first prayed out of fear, he prayed to the God of Abraham and Isaac, as if this God was distant. Then he has the wrestling match, and they have their close encounter, and as a result of that close encounter, he says, now I'm praising this God as what? As my own God. He's personal to me. He's not just the God of my father and my grandfather. He is my God now. So very significant event. Now, so he goes to Succoth, and then he goes to Shechem. Let's find that on the map. While his brother goes down to Seir. We don't have those. I don't have a very good map here. I need to get you a bigger map.
Is there one up there?
I don't know. I'll find it. Lindsay came looking for a map, and I offered him one. I may have given him my best map, but anyway. The land of Seir is where Esau went, and that became the land of the Edomites. Remember, Esau was the father of the Edomites, and where is that? That's kind of on the south and the eastern side of the Dead Sea. That's where Seir is, and that's where the Edomites lived. Now, where Jacob wound up going, Succoth, I think, is on the east side of the Jordan River, but then he moves over to Shechem. And Shechem is it's on the west side of the Jordan River, about halfway between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. And Shechem is a very significant place. What do you remember that's significant about Shechem?
There's some battles there.
Yeah. If you recall, that's one of the first places that Abraham lit when he came back. If you go back to Genesis chapter 12, when God calls him or recalls him, he's in Haran at the time. He says, get over to the land of Canaan. That's where I want you to go. And in chapter 12, verse 6, it says, and Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem. All right, so he stops there, and then he winds up down to verse 8. He goes to Bethel as well. And we know the significant thing that happened in Bethel to Jacob, which is what? When did Jacob go to Bethel? Y'all remember. Right after Jacob tricks his father, he gets the birthright. Esau says, I'm going to kill my brother. So Mama says what? Go to the land of my parents. And so Jacob leaves there, and the first place he camps overnight is Bethel. And then what happens in Bethel? He lays his head on a rock and he has a dream. What does he dream about? The ladder, Jacob's ladder. And he wakes up and he says, wow, he says, I'm truly in the house of God. That's why he named it Bethel. Bethel, the house of God. And he has a revelation of Christ there, because I believe that Jacob's ladder is a foreshadowing of the cross. And I believe that the rock where he laid his head was a foreshadowing of Christ. You have something else about Shechem? If you have it written, it also write, and it said here about Shechem, he says that Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is the land of Canaan, and he bought a piece of land where he pitched his tent. Anybody remember what happened on that piece of land in Shechem where he pitched his tent? So let me look up Joshua 24:32.
Joshua what?
Joshua, I think it's the last chapter of Joshua 20.
That's where Joseph was buried.
Yeah. Remember, this is after the children of Israel spent their 400 years in Egypt. Joseph said, I don't want to be buried in Egypt, so his body was embalmed and he was taken back, and it said that he was buried at this very spot in Shechem, on the property that Jacob bought when he first came back to the Promised Land after his 20 years.
You know, on the map, Bethel is very, very close to Shechem.
Mm-hmm. They're very close.
So he's just kind of staying in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because if you kind of read, it doesn't say it specifically, but if you read between the lines, it's as if when God calls Jacob back to the Promised Land, he wants him to go to Bethel, which is the place where he encountered him first. They had this wonderful meeting, and Jacob had this wonderful revelation. But instead of going to Bethel, he goes to Shechem. And you remember what it was said of Abraham, or Abram, when he first came back to the promised land. He pitched his tent halfway between Bethel and Ai. And Ai means heap of ruins. So he's kind of right in the middle. You know, God wanted him to be in Bethel. He certainly didn't want him to be in the heap of ruins, but he was right in the middle of the place. So it's almost as if, you know, one of the questions you ask is, we get to chapter 34, and chapter 34 has some pretty lurid stuff in it. You think, why do we have this stuff? And some authors think that it's because at this point in time, Jacob was out of the will of God, because instead of going to Bethel, where he wanted to go, he wound up and he put down some roots, if you will, in Shechem, and he did that, and he got himself and his family into a heap of trouble there. So let's read about that.
He's only a hair away.
No, it's not as close as this map.
Oh, okay.
I need to get some copies of
Yeah,
this one.
they're
This is a better map.
Sure is.
it's misleading how close or how far they are away, because Israel is such a small place. But they're not a great distance away.
But I have a map of the land of the 12 tribes. Need to-
Yes, so Shechem is due west of Succoth, and it appears to be north of Bethel. But yeah, we need to get a better map so we can follow that. But anyway,
Yeah.
see, you can see where they are. He's in Shechem now, and some very disturbing things happen in Shechem. Nancy, you want to pick up in chapter 34?
Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the women of the region. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the region, saw her, he seized her and lay with her by force.
Pause right there just a second. That particular verse that Nancy just read has been the matter of controversy for thousands of years. What Nancy read there, in my translation, is the same, that Shechem, the son of Hamor, saw her, that he was delighted with her. He took her, and it says he lay with her by force, as if this was a rape that occurred. There's some translations that are not quite that strong. That most of the translations, I think literally what it says, that he lay with her, the word would be more like improperly or illegitimately. The idea was that it was a sexual relationship, that it may not have been totally by force. Dinah may have entered into this willingly, but nevertheless it was illegitimate. Why? Because they were not married. But whether it was a rape or whether it was simply an illegitimate relationship, just kind of weigh that in the context of the rest of the story. And as we read the rest of the story, you got to ask yourself, if you haven't already, why in the world is this here? Because you see this, there's really nothing commendable about any of the conduct of anybody in this whole chapter. I mean, it's a bad story. Read on, Nancy.
I knew the women gonna get him in trouble.
What was that?
It was in the wrong place.
Yeah, that was it. Another time.
Says he violated.
Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
That says defiled.
So I mean, that's rape.
Yeah, and again, this is not something I'm making up. This is something that has been debated for literally, thousands of years.
Well, how can you debate the Bible? It says he violated it.
No, it's a question of the word, whether it's violated, whether he did it by force, whether he violated her, or whether the relationship was simply illegitimate. To me, it does seem like it was non-consensual. It was a rape.
Exactly.
But other translations.
It's sort of like a statutory rape. You have a younger person that willingly does it, but
Yeah.
they're too young, that's statutory.
Well,
But
it didn't say that.
But
In
that's not
any
violent.
event-
That is, she violated, but
Yeah.
it wasn't against her will.
Yeah, that's what we don't know. That's what it could be either way. But the point is that the relation, there's no doubt that the relationship was illegitimate. There's no reason why this daughter of Israel should have been messing around with a Canaanite man. Okay, so it was what happened was wrong. Whether Shechem was totally at fault, whether Dinah was partially at fault, we don't know here. But the relationship itself was wrong. Okay, verse 3. Read on.
And his soul was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl to be my wife." Now Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah, But his sons were with his cattle in the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him, just as the sons of Jacob came in from the field. When they heard of it, the men were indignant and very angry, because he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. But Hamor spoke with him, saying, The heart of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Make marriages with us, give your daughter to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall live with us, and the land shall be open to you. Live and trade in it, and get property in it.
Pause right there just a second. So you see what's going on. It appears that Shechem is truly infatuated with this girl, with Dinah, wants her to be his wife, and so he gets his father, who is the chieftain of the land, and he goes to meet with Jacob, and the appeal is made. We really want your daughter. My son wants to marry your daughter, and why don't we just have a treaty here that we'll give you, you give us your daughter or daughters, and we'll give you our daughters. We'll intermarry, and we'll just mingle here. So that's the invitation. Anything wrong with that?
Yes.
Sounds almost like the Garden of Eden to me, when the devil was talking to Eve, everything would be okay.
Yeah. But what in particular is
That
wrong?
wasn't the plan. They're supposed to stay.
They're not supposed to intermarry.
That's right. They're not supposed to. And why not?
God doesn't want them.
God doesn't want them to. Why? He's preserving. What is one of the principal purposes of Israel?
Because
The womb of
Jesus
Messiah.
Christ.
That's right. The womb of the Messiah.
Right.
The purity of it, God's chosen people. And what is this a proposition to do? To defile that whole separation, to intermarry, so that there's nothing to distinguish the Jews from the God's chosen people from the pagans of the
That's why I say
land.
it sounds like to me, the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
The devil is, he defiled the relationship that they had with God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the same temptation that Lot faced in that city and Sodom and Gomorrah. with his daughters.
Exactly. That's one of the things I thought of too. The desire of the evil people at that time to take the men by force, the visitors by force, and Lot offered up his own daughters, to satisfy the lust, the sickness. One of the commentators said this is also harkens back to, remember at the time of Noah, it was said that the sons of God, meaning the angels, the fallen angels, had mated with the daughters of men, and they produced the giants who are still in the land. So this is kind of an effort, Satan's effort to pollute the nation of Israel, to pollute the womb of the Messiah. Why? So that Jesus Christ would not come along. Satan is all over this, if you will. Okay, read on.
Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, Let me find favor with you, and whatever you say to me I will give. Put the marriage present and gift as high as you like, and I will give whatever you ask me. Only give me the girl to be my wife. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to him, We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you, that you will become as we are, and every male among you must be circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live among you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone.
Pause right there. So, the sons of Jacob say, all right, this is how we're going to deal with this. Now, it says that they were developing this trickery in their minds. But part of their trickery involved offering up circumcision. Now, what is wrong with that?
That was for God's people.
Yeah. And why are they offering up circumcision here?
To make them sore.
Yeah, well, that was part of their plan. That's right.
I think they probably would turn them down and they could go about their way. That's what I was thinking. In other words, offer up something you know they're not going to take.
Yeah, well, except that they underestimated the desire of Shechem for Dinah, right? So, whether his lust was strong or his love was pure and true, we don't really know. But
Then after
whatever.
that, they should have said, and.
Yeah, that's right. If you do that, we got something else.
Yeah, we got something else, right? Back up.
Yeah. But it was wholly illegitimate for the sons of Jacob to offer circumcision to these pagans. And why is that?
Because they were not God's people.
That's right. It was to be the sign of circumcision between God and his chosen people. And again, what was the purpose of circumcision? Well, it was
To make them trust in God.
That's right. The whole idea of the circumcision is that Abraham had trusted in his own flesh. And God says, do not trust in your own flesh. In other words, you must mortify your flesh. You must kill your flesh if you want to be in a covenant relationship with me. The whole problem is they were relying way too heavily on their own flesh. And that's what circumcision was always and ever intended to be, a reminder to people that we should not put any confidence in the flesh. Paul said, as we've stated before, we are the true circumcision who worship in the Spirit of God and glory in Christ Jesus and who put no confidence in the flesh. So, what the sons of Jacob are offering up here have nothing to do with the true meaning of circumcision, right? In fact, they're offering up circumcision for what purpose? If you enter into this rite of circumcision, you're not doing what God would want. In other words, the whole purpose of circumcision is to deny yourself and to invite God's intervention. They're saying, if you engage in circumcision, you're going to get what you want. You see what's wrong with that?
Would it also be the blood part of it too?
Oh yeah, the blood has everything to do with circumcision, right?
That, that's when, after Jesus came, when they were having the discussion in the churches of the people needed to be circumcised and all that,
Yeah, that's right. In fact, we could pause right there and look at that. There's a couple of things that I thought about as I was reading this. One of them is what you recall that Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 27 and 30, where he is reciting about, he said, it was revealed to me that our Lord Jesus Christ, in the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat, this is my body which is broken for you. And in the same manner also he took a cup when he supped, and he drank it, and he gave to the disciples and said, drink ye all of it, this is my blood, this is a new covenant in my blood which is shed for you and for the remission of your sins. This do as oft as you drink it in remembrance of me. But then Paul goes on to say what? Who's got that? Verses 1 Corinthians 11, 27 through 30.
Therefore, whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord. A man ought to examine himself before he eats the bread and drinks the cup. For anyone who eats and drinks without recognizing the body of the Lord eats and drinks judgment on himself.
Yeah, in some translations say he eats and drinks damnation unto himself. But the idea is that if you take the cup, the bread and the wine or the juice in an improper way, not only does it not benefit you, it results in judgment or damnation. So I think what we have here in chapter 30 of Genesis is really a foreshadowing of what Paul said there, because they're entering.
What was that again?
That was 1 Corinthians chapter 11.
Okay, good, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and the idea is that if you take the bread and the cup unworthily, it leads to your judgment or your damnation. The same way that if you take unto yourself circumcision in the wrong way, it leads to your judgment or your damnation, which is what happened here in the Old Testament. You see that connection?
And two, also, if you play with its salvation, it can do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing Kenya referred to, I think, is in Galatians chapter 5, verses 2 through 4. Who's got that? Galatians 5. 2 through 4, this is where Paul was talking about how circumcision is misused.
Carry each other's, no, that's 6.
Galatians, 5, 2 through 4, you're close.
Mark my words, I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you at all. Again, I declare to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is obligated to obey the whole law. You who are trying to be justified by law have been alienated from Christ. You have fallen away from grace.
Yeah.
But by faith, we eagerly await the Spirit, the righteousness for which we hope.
Paul is talking there about the abuse of circumcision in what context? What was going on at the time?
They were trying to make all of the Greeks and other Gentiles be circumcised in order to be Jewish.
That's right. In order to be Christian. They said, if you want to accept Christ, that's a good thing, but you can't accept Christ unless what?
Unless you're circumcised.
Unless you're circumcised by the Jews, because that's just what we do. And Paul is saying, no, you've totally missed the point of circumcision. If you don't view circumcision in the right way, it's going to do you more harm than good. And that's exactly what was going on here, is that circumcision was used in exactly the wrong way. It was being used what? Not to please God, it was being used for people to get what they wanted, which is the exact opposite of what circumcision is, you see. Circumcision is a mortification of the flesh so that people will acknowledge that they do not have power. It is God who does anything that's of significance. Okay, any other comments about that? Good points. All right, Terry, you want to pick up and read from there?
18.
Yes, sir.
Their proposal seemed good to Hamor and his son Shechem. The young man, who was the most honored of all his father's household, lost no time in doing what they said, because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city to speak to their fellow townsmen. These men are friendly towards us, they say. Let them live in our land and trade in it. The land has plenty of room for them. We can marry their daughters, and they can marry ours. But the men will consent to live with us as one people only on the condition that our males be circumcised.
Pause right there. Can you imagine the speech that's being given by the king and said, look, these guys, they're a bunch of wealthy folks. We got a bunch of stuff there. It says that and we can join together with their ranks, but all you have to do is be circumcised. Can you imagine how their jaws must have dropped at that point in time? Say, what? What else you got for us? But he continues to plead with them. Verse 23.
Won't their livestock, their property, and all their other animals become ours? So let us give our consent to them, and they will settle among us.
So what is he saying here? He says, look at all this stuff. He says, we're actually going to wind up taking all this stuff to ourselves. We're going to do this right now, but, you're going to have to endure a little bit of discomfort, but in the end, you see all that stuff out there? We're going to get that stuff for ourselves.
We're talking cash flow.
That's right. That's cash flow. That's exactly what it is. Very good. All right, Sarah, pick up from there, 24.
Where at? Let's see.
24.
Okay. All the men who went out to the city gate agreed with Hamor and son Shechem, and every male in the city was circumcised. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, two of Joshua's sons,
Jacob's sons,
Simeon,
Simeon and Levi. Mhm.
Dinah's brother, took the swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sisters had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out of the fields. They carried off all of their wealth and all of the women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. When Jacob and Simeon and Levi, who have brought trouble on me by making me a stench of the Canaanites and whatever that is, and people living in the land, we are we are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, and my household will be destroyed. But they replied, should we have treated our sister like a prostitute?
You read this chapter, you come to the end of it, and you think, is there anything in here that's commendable? Anything that anybody did? All right, you know. Dina, all right, maybe she was an innocent victim in all this. Let's spot her that, you know, that she didn't do anything wrong, she was just a victim. But still, it doesn't say that she did anything commendable. The sons of Jacob, they devised this plan to weaken their enemy, and when they're at their weakest point, they come in and they kill them. They kill every man in the place. They take the children and the women and all the loot, and they basically strip the town, and they're gone. And then Jacob sees that this is going, and what does he do? He comes to Simeon, and Levi says, you have brought trouble on me by making me stink among the inhabitants of the land. He says, and my men being few in number, they will gather together against me and attack me, and I'll be destroyed. So he jumps on the boys that did this, and what's their response? Are they remorseful?
No.
They say, nobody's going to treat our daughter like a prostitute. You know, so they're self-righteous. Now, as a result of what they did, what was the consequence? Anybody remember?
They lost their inheritance.
Yeah, they were disinherited. Because remember that the oldest son of Jacob was who? Reuben and Simeon and Levi and Judah. Where did the line of Christ go through? The first one?
Judah.
Judah, the fourth one. So we see here the incident that disqualifies Simeon and Levi, and we're going to see shortly after how Reuben was disqualified. And so, you know, we have in this a disqualification which then qualifies Judah for the Messianic line. So the question, I guess we'll end with this today. If there's nothing commendable in the conduct of anybody here, why do we have this, and why is this in the Scripture? What are we to learn from this? First off, ask, did anything good come from this? Actually, a couple of good things did come from this, and we just talked about one of them. One of them was, it was evidently always God's plan that Judah would be the line of the Messiah. And so this is something that resulted in Judah being established as the line. What else happened as a result of this? Or might have happened as a result of this. We don't get this until later on. But one of the things...
actually goes to Bethel where he was supposed to be.
Yeah, he winds up going to the right place. That's good. But remember, in the following chapter, as this band of people moves around, how are they treated by the other indigenous people in the land? They were scared to death of them. Why? Because they learned about the encounter between this small tribe and the town of Shechem and what happened. They probably went to the town afterwards, and what did they see? They saw a bunch of dead men, a bunch of mutilated dead men, and they saw that all their goods, all their possession, all their women, all their children were taken away. So they feared these people. Why? Because of what had happened there. And so they received protection as a result of this event. You know, as I read through this, I thought about, you know, and this also, what we have here is a foreshadowing of the nature of the sons of Jacob that led up to the despicable act of selling their own brother into slavery to Egypt because they were jealous of him. But you remember, Joseph sort of wraps the whole thing up in one of the last speeches that's recorded that Joseph says to his brothers. His brothers, at some point in time, when they're finally caught red-handed, they're feeling really remorseful, right, about what they've done. They finally recognize their guilt. Probably not only the guilt of what they've done to their brother, but probably the guilt that they've committed of the evil things that they've done all along. And what does Joseph say to them?
You intended it for harm, but God intended it for good.
Yeah. All this stuff you did, all the stuff you concocted, you had evil in your heart. But God had a plan here. And God's plan was for good, and good came out despite your desire for evil. And I think that explanation sort of gives you the rationale, if you will, for what we see in chapter 34.
Maybe for what we see in our society today.
That's right. There's a
How
lot
could
of,
it
there's a
get
lot
worse?
of, that's an excellent point that Jackie brings up. There is a lot of wickedness, a lot of evil stuff going on. You think, how can good possibly come from this?
It just disturbs me that Levi becomes the priestly tribe.
Yeah. And I can't explain that. I can't explain that. Yeah, particularly when the Levites would have been the group in charge of circumcision. I mean, that was a sacred right for them, and he's willing to give it away. I don't know.
He
Doesn't
learned
make
a
any sense to
valuable
me.
lesson, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. What'd you start to say, Tommy?
That all those wives and children was, once they was taken away, were they used as their wives too? Or-
They were probably taken as slaves. I mean, it would have been still prohibited that any of the Jews intermarry with the Canaanite people. Now, whether they did it or not, I don't know. We're going to see that some strange relationships developed later on, even with Judah. But I don't think we have an explanation of what happened to them. I think the whole idea, the reason they were taken away is just so when the neighboring peoples would see Shechem, they'd see a place that was deserted and ransacked and looted as a result of the encounter with these people of God, if you will. Okay, next time we'll pick up in chapter 35. Any other comments on this as we go?
God bless.
Well, thank you. But again, what Jackie said is important here about what's going on today. We see so much evil going on. The thing that we have to do, rather than just being totally overcome with this evil, but just recognize that what men intend for evil, God can turn into good. So in all this evil we see, God will, if we're patient, we trust in Him, God will turn into good for His purposes.